The history of Katara 6 was long, bloody, and tragic. But all of that changed in the last 50 years. The governments of the planet abandoned war and turned, finally, to progress. And now, after generations of rebuilding, the Kataran people stood on the brink of their greatest achievement. A faster-than-light breakthrough that would take them farther than any of their ancestors could have imagined. KL, creator of the Absalon Drive, and his fellow scientist, Ariska, were to be the first to test it. Two pioneers, chosen to lead their world into a new age. For the first time in their history, Katara 6 was ready to leave its own stars behind. According to their calculations, the Absalon Drive could take them across the entire galaxy, from the Delta Quadrant to the Alpha Quadrant, in minutes. It was the kind of discovery that would rewrite their civilization. Inside the sleek experimental vessel, KL and Ariska ran their final diagnostics. Power relay stabilized, filled geometry matched the models, and the drive hummed with potential. With one last promise, to return to their people with wonders beyond compare, KL activated the Absalon Drive. Reality tore open. Transwarp space bloomed around them. The ride was violent, chaotic, but eventually the ship stabilized. They had done it. They were moving faster than any Kataran ship ever dreamed. Moments later, the drive disengaged, and they emerged into normal space, into the Alpha Quadrant, and into Hell. There was no welcoming star, no vision of distant worlds, only devastation. A colossal cube, unlike anything in their science or mythology, was locked in battle with dozens of smaller vessels. Each of them shaped like a circular disc with a secondary hull, slender structures. Flashes of weapons, ships exploding, debris spiraling past their view screen. Ariska tried to rotate the ship, anything to escape, when a hail broke through the interference. Unknown vessel, you are entering an active combat zone with the Borg. Retreat immediately. The message was never finished. The ship that held them was destroyed in an instant. So quickly that its logs, its sensors, its very memory of the encounter would never be transmitted to Starfleet Command. KL and Ariska were alone. Before they could react, before they could even breathe, two humanoid shapes materialized inside the cabin. Pale, cold, metal fused with flesh. This was the Borg. KL tried to stand, tried to move, but one of the drones seized his arm. Two assimilation tubules stabbed into his skin. The world blurred, his knees buckled. The last thing he saw was Ariska being pinned against the bulkhead, her hands clawing at the drone holding her, before her entire body went slack, her eyes becoming empty. Then the voices came, a flood of thought, a tidal wave of minds. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't Kyle anymore. He was part of something vast, and a single directive rose above the noise. Take the vessel, take the propulsion system, return to Unicomplex 1, back into the Delta Quadrant. When the Absalon Drive tore open its first transwarp aperture, the Katarans believed they were taking their first step into the stars. They were wrong. From the moment the drive activated, before the ship even left Kataran space, the Borg detected it. Because to the collective, faster-than-light travel is not just a method of movement. It's a signature, a fingerprint of a civilization's potential. And the Absalon Drive broadcast a single, unmistakable message. This species has solved something we have not. Faster stabilization, lower power thresholds, more efficient field geometry. A method of transwarp travel that did not decay, did not tear itself apart, did not require a vast network of conduits to remain stable. To the Borg, this was not an experiment, it was an upgrade. And upgrades must be taken. Across subspace, the collective calculated value, risk, adaptability, and biological compatibility in microseconds. The Katarans were advanced enough to be useful, but not advanced enough to stop them. Not militarized, not hardened, not prepared. A civilization ripe for conversion. The moment Kyle and Ariska's ship arrived at Wolf 359, everything the Borg needed was already known. their propulsion technology, their brain structures, their planetary defenses, their weaknesses. Kael's memory provided the rest.
There are voices, thousands, no, millions, not speaking, thinking, cataloging, pulling, reaching into me, through me, pulling everything apart and sorting it into order.
To the collective, an assimilated scientist is more than a drone. They are a data core, a compressed archive of cultural, neurological, and technological information, ready to be decrypted and categorized. Every thought Kael had ever formed was now a tactical resource. His memories of Kataran infrastructure were converted into a planetary schematic. His scientific knowledge became a reference manual. His emotional connections were stripped down into the predictive behavior models, useful only insofar as they revealed how the population would react to invasion. His fear, his confusion, his shock were simply irrelevant. The collective does not interpret emotion, it measures it, calculates how it will shape resistance, and neutralizes it. The more the Borg absorbed, the clearer the evaluation became. Technological value? High. Biological compatibility? High. Predicted resistance? Moderate. Strategic cost? Minimal. Outcome? Assimilation. A single Kataran breakthrough had just sealed the fate of an entire civilization.
My thoughts feel rounded, like someone is sanding them smooth. Riska's voice is gone. I can't remember her face, but the collective can. They see everything.
For the Borg, this was not a decision, it was a calculation. And the calculation was complete. A world of nearly 2 billion people, with no concept of what had just happened in a distant star system, had been selected. 3 cubes were ordered to depart from the nearest command nexus. A moderate investment, more than enough. While Kael's consciousness dissolved in the hive around him, the Borg began preparing the invasion of Katara 6. Because the collective does not hesitate. It only proceeds. And Katara 6 had been judged, and it was worthy. Assimilation is often depicted as a single moment. Tubules, a scream, fade to black. But that isn't how it happens. For the Borg, assimilation is not an event. It is a process. Precise, layered, and brutally efficient. And Kael, whether he understood it or not, experienced every stage. When the assimilation tubules pierced his skin, the Borg didn't just inject a virus. They injected an infrastructure. Billions of nanoscopic machines flooded his bloodstream, riding on his red blood cells, circulating through his body with every heartbeat. They weren't random. Each one carried a blueprint, a sequence of instructions on how to rebuild him. First target? Control systems. Muscles, nerves, motor pathways. The nanoprobes locked onto his peripheral nervous system, quietly overriding it. That's why his legs buckled so quickly. Not because he was weak, but because his body no longer belonged to him.
I'm trying to stand. I can feel my muscles respond, then stop. It's like someone put a hand on my shoulder and pushed me back into my own body. Everything is heavy. Everything is delayed.
Next, the nanoprobes went for his brain. They threaded themselves into his neural pathways, rerouting, reinforcing, and most importantly, retuning his mind. The goal was simple: make his brain compatible with the collective. Thoughts that had once been private began to echo. Memories started to surface without his control. Concepts, faces, equations, all rising and dissolving into the sea of other minds. The Borg weren't just reading his thoughts, they were formatting them, stripping away anything that wasn't useful, compressing the rest into clean, efficient data.
I remember my first equation, the day I thought of folding space like a sheet. I can see the chalk, the board, my hands. But the memory doesn't feel like mine, it feels observed, like someone else is watching it with me.
While nanoprobes rewired his nervous system and tuned his mind, another process began: physical conversion. Implant sites were chosen based on function. Ocular systems to replace valuable organic eyes. Auditory input to link him directly to the collective signal. circulatory junctions to support the increased metabolic load of cybernetics, skeletal and muscular anchors to handle the weight of the new components. Microscopic construction began below the skin. Bone density increased, tissue layers reorganized, blood vessels rerouted. Even before the visible implants appeared, Kael's body had already started to become something else. Across the cabin, Ariska's experience was the same process, expressed differently. Her nervous system fought harder. Her vital signs spiked, crashed, and spiked again. Her mind clung to singular, desperate thoughts. Kael's name, the promise they made to return. But the nanoprobes didn't care. They adapted. Where biological resistance was higher, more drones would be injected. Where panic was greater, sedation was increased. Where mental collapse risked damaging useful data, emotional pathways were simply shut off. The Borg did not negotiate. They tuned.
She's on the floor. I know that. I saw her fall. But when I try to focus on her, on Ariska, something redirects my attention. A status feed, environmental readings, hull integrity. Her heartbeat is a number now. Nothing more.
Assimilation is often described as a violation. To the Borg, it's maintenance. Kael's individuality wasn't broken because the collective took pleasure in destroying it. It was dismantled because individuality is inefficient. One mind is slow. It hesitates, it questions. A hive mind does not. So as the nanoprobes rebuilt his brain, they smoothed out the edges that made him a person. His sense of self, his capacity for doubt, his emotional priorities. Fear became irrelevant. Hope became irrelevant. Curiosity remained, but only as a computational asset. Kael's intellect was preserved. Kael, the person, was not. Physically, the first outward signs of conversion would come later. The pale skin tone, the optical implant, the metal plating. But internally, by the time his body was dragged to a Borg alcove and wired into a maturation system, the most important change had already occurred. He was no longer the author of his own thoughts. The collective was.
There's a pattern. Every time I try to think about home, the thought diverts. Population, defenses, energy grids, locations of shipyards. It's all there. I remember everything. I just don't remember why it matters.
Ariska's conversion followed a similar pattern. Different body, different brain chemistry, same result. Her fear registered as a spike in neural activity. Her scream registered as a waveform. Her memory became data streams. To the collective, she wasn't a friend, a colleague, or even Ariska. She was biological sample 03, neural map variation 02, redundant but valuable backup of Kataran scientific culture. A second source to cross-check Kael's data, a way to verify that his memories had not been corrupted by stress or anomaly. 2 lives, 1 dataset. This is the first stage of assimilation. Not the metal, not the implants, not the iconic plate skin and blank stare. The first stage is conversion of control. Over the body, over the senses, over the mind. By the time a new drone stands still and stares ahead, the real work has already been done. They are not quiet because they are calm. They are quiet because there is nothing left in them that belongs to them. Only function, only purpose, only the will of the collective. And as the Absalon test ship turned away from Wolf 359 under Borg control, Kael and Ariska were no longer passengers. They were components, and the collective had already chosen their next destination, Katara 6. The journey back to the Delta Quadrant wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a recovery mission. It wasn't even transportation in the conventional sense. It was processing. The Absalon ship, still intact, still running, was now under Borg control, guided not by Kael's hands, but by the stripped, reorganized fragments of his mind. The Borg didn't need a pilot. They simply needed his familiarity with the interface. To the collective, Kael's knowledge wasn't lost. It was reconfigured. The vessel aligned with a Borg transwarp conduit, entered the corridor, and accelerated toward the center of Borg civilization. Unicomplex 1.
The corridor stretches forever. The conduit hums with numbers, signals, equations I understand instantly, but not consciously. I know the ship is stable. I know the vectors. I know the route. I don't remember learning any of it. I just know.
The Unicomplex is not a city. It's not a station, not a world. It is the central nervous system of an empire that spans entire regions of the galaxy. Billions of drones, thousands of cubes, and every assimilation event in the Delta Quadrant feeds into the same place. Every thought, every voice, every memory. Everything the Borg are is focused here. The arrival of a ship carrying new propulsion technology wasn't uncommon. The Borg regularly harvested advancements from conquered species. But the Absalon drive represented something different. A working method of independent, stable transwarp that required no pre-existing Borg infrastructure. And that demanded direct attention. From the moment Kyl's consciousness entered into the collective's lattice, it was already being sorted. Propulsion knowledge, mathematical innovations, cultural context, planetary data, neurological adaptability, emotional predictability, biological integration, expected resistance patterns. None of it judged, all of it cataloged. Ariska's mind provided redundancy, a verification source that allowed the collective to confirm what Kyl had seen, remembered, or interpreted incorrectly. 2 lives, 2 perspectives, but still that same dataset. To the Borg, this was efficiency. Once the ship arrived at the Unicomplex, Kyl and Ariska were removed from the vessel and moved into specialized assimilation alcoves. These weren't ordinary regeneration chambers. These were analysis nodes, designed specifically for drones carrying unique scientific or technological value. Here, their minds were fully integrated into the Queen's lattice. Because the Queen does not simply oversee the collective, she interprets it. She evaluates what is useful, what is novel, what should be adapted, and what should be purged. Kyl's innovations captured her attention immediately. A stable transwarp aperture could bridge quadrants without catastrophic energy decay. This was the kind of advancement that could reshape Borg expansion for centuries. The drive was disassembled, its particle sequence mapped, its subspace distortion patterns measured, its field geometry replicated in simulation, improved, and stored for manufacturing. Within hours, the collective understood the Absalon drive better than the Katarans ever had. But the Borg do not merely duplicate technologies. They consume them, refine them, and integrate it into themselves.
The Queen's presence is overwhelming. Not a person, not a voice. A gravity. A pressure inside my mind that shapes every thought. She examines my memory like tools, like instruments, like hearts.
Once the analysis was complete, the collective turned to the next step in the chain: evaluation of the species. Kyl's memories became a planetary blueprint. Population clusters, distribution of military assets, location of scientific institutions, medical centers, spaceports, underground shelters, socio-political history, crisis response behavior, and cultural resistant thresholds. Everything the Katarans were, every strength, every weakness, every statistical probability was laid bare. The verdict was instantaneous. They were valuable. Not because of their culture, not because of their history, not because of who they were, but because of what they could become. A species capable of creating a breakthrough the Borg had failed to perfect. The reward was worth the cost. 3 cubes were ordered to depart from the nearest command nexus, not to explore, not to negotiate, not even to conquer, but to assimilate. Kyl and Ariska would not return to the world as explorers. They would return home as access points. Nodes through which the collective would tear apart a civilization and remake it in its own image. And as the order was transmitted, one final fragment passed through Kyl's diminishing awareness. Resistance, moderate. Outcome, assimilation. His planet had been judged, and the Borg began to move. The Borg do not attack planets blindly. They do not waste cubes. They do not pursue species because of hatred, fear, or conquest. They classify. Every civilization that comes into contact with the collective undergoes the same process: a precise, mathematical evaluation of its worth. Not its morality, not its innocence. They could care less about its history. They look at the value. Kyle,'s mind, now fully threaded into the lattice, became the template for this evaluation. Through him, the collective saw Kataris 6 clearly, not as a homeworld, not as a culture, but as a resource profile. The first metric the Borg analyzes is technological distinctiveness. The Absalon drive alone placed the Katarans far above most civilizations encountered at their developmental stage. A breakthrough that allowed interstellar distances to be folded and compressed without the massive energy loss of Borg transwarp conduits. It was definitely worth absorbing. But the Borg don't stop at the breakthrough. They calculate the environment that created it. Kyle's memories were vital. A society that had recently unified. Research culture driven by collaboration. Decentralized scientific institutions. Widespread access to higher education. A stable, post-war era with heavy investment in technology. And most importantly, a culture that encouraged innovation over tradition. All of these pointed to one conclusion. The species would continue to improve. Left alone, they might achieve more breakthroughs. Breakthroughs the Borg would then have to fight to obtain. That risk was unacceptable.
My world unfolds like a hologram. Cities, power grids, university district, transport routes. The collective sees everything, even things I never noticed, even things I didn't know I remembered.
Next, the Borg evaluated biological compatibility. The Katarans were not too fragile to assimilate, like some methane-based species, nor too dangerous like species 8472. Their natural architecture was stable, modular, and adaptable, capable of supporting a full suite of cybernetics. In short, excellent drone stock. The collective also scanned for potential hazards, neurological conditions that could disrupt the hive mind, immune system irregularities, unstable societal structures that might hinder rapid assimilation, planetary variables that might damage drones. Kataris 6 presented none of these obstacles. Everything about them said one thing, and it's the one thing the Borg only care about: efficient. Finally, the Borg evaluated the expected resistance. Kataran history was violent, but their modern culture had moved away from that militarization. Their population centers were clustered. Their defenses were planetary, not orbital. Their weapons were designed for surface war, not space. Even in their strongest projections, the Kantarans could not mount more than moderate resistance. And moderate has a very specific meaning to the Borg. Absorbable without slowing the machinery. Resistance at this level isn't a threat, it's a time frame.
I feel fear rising, but it isn't mine. It's theirs. The collective shows me simulations. Our cities falling, our people running, not to warn me, just to confirm the model.
With every metric accounted, the collective made its final classification. Technological value high. Biological compatibility high. Resistance level moderate. Strategic risk low. Resource extraction potential profitable. Outcome assimilation required. This was not a debate, not a moral choice, not even a strategy. It was arithmetic. The moment Kyle's ship had entered Wolf 359, the equation was already solved. Katara 6 was not a civilization anymore. It was a target. And within minutes of the classification being complete, the order was transmitted. The 3 cubes would proceed to the Kataran system and begin planetary acquisition. Not because the Katarans were evil, not because they were a threat, not because they even mattered, but because they were useful. And usefulness, to the Borg, is the closest thing to mercy they will ever offer. When the collective issued the order to assimilate Katara 6, the 3 cubes broke away from separate transwarp nodes and plunged into the darkness between stars. They didn't accelerate, they didn't maneuver, they simply appeared, erupting from transwarp apertures like blades sliding through the fabric of space. Each cube was a continent-sized machine. Each one carried tens of thousands of drones. Each one was capable of conquering a world. But the Borg do not overwhelm with brute force. They overwhelm with precision. 3 cubes meant something specific. Strong enough to crush resistance. Measured enough not to waste resources. Sufficient to ensure assimilation without damaging the planet. Because the Borg did not want Katara 6 destroyed. They needed it functional. Intact planets produce better drones. When the first cube entered the outer Kataran system, every long-range scanner failed. Not because the Borg jammed them, but because the sheer magnitude of Borg emissions overloaded everything. Civilian satellites, military sensor grids, astronomical observatories, spaceport early warning systems. A blank wall of static swept through the planet's detection network. To the technicians on the surface, it looked like a glitch, a problem to troubleshoot. For several minutes, not a single authority on Katara 6 realized what had arrived.
The collective sees the system as structures, energy fields, points of leverage. Not stars, not beauty, only function.
The Borg removed Katara 6's voice. Every outbound signal, civilian and military, was severed. Emergency broadcast channels, orbital command relays, scientific data streams, government frequencies, deep space communication towers. Civilization requires communication. The Borg remove it first. With the world blinded and silent, the cubes began their planetary autopsy. They mapped everything: population density, power grids, hospitals, police infrastructure, weapon stockpiles, transportation networks, atmospheric compulsion, predicted panic patterns, political centers, underground shelters. Katara 6 was not a homeworld to the Borg. It was a problem to be solved. An equation.
I can see my planet, but not the way I remember it. Its lines, heat signatures, movement patterns. They're studying us like a system, not a species.
Once the cubes reached optimal position, they dismantled Katara 6's defenses. Not with weapons fire, but with surgical deactivation. Defense satellites depowered, military relays were fried, orbital stations lost gravity control, surface-to-space weapons went offline. To the Katarans, it resembled a planetary blackout. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just silence. Before deploying a single drone, the Borg reshaped the sky. Columns of ionized particles opened in the atmosphere, stable transport corridors stretching from orbit to the surface. Through these, drones could be deployed instantly, anywhere, and resistance forces would have no chance to regroup. To civilians looking up, it appeared like shimmering curtains of light, beautiful and fatal.
The sky is no longer weather, it's infrastructure.
The Borg had not spoken at Wolf 359. Two scientists posed no tactical challenge. There was nothing to negotiate, nothing to warn. But a planet is different. A planet can resist, even briefly. And that is when the Borg speak. Because their iconic message is not a taunt, it's not intimidation, it's protocol. A message delivered only to species with enough cohesion, technology, or military presence to delay assimilation. So as the cubes settled into orbit, as confusion rippled across cities, as civil authorities struggled to understand the cascading failures, every broadcast channel on the planet went dark. Emergency alerts muted, communicators cut off mid-sentence. Screens across Katara 6 blinked once, twice, and a chorus of voices replaced every frequency.
We are your Borg. Lower your shields and zero your ships. We will add biological and technological distinctness to our own. Your culture will adapt to serve us. Resistance is futile.
It was the first and last time Katara 6 ever heard the collective. The moment the broadcast ended, panic erupted. Not organized panic, not defensive panic. The panic of a species facing something it couldn't comprehend. People looked to the sky. They saw three perfect geometric shapes hovering over their world. Silent, motionless, inevitable. And then, the Borg began assimilation. The Borg did not fire a single disruptive energy pulse or torpedo as they seized orbit over Katara 6. They didn't need to. Control was already achieved. From their positions high above the planet, the three cubes initiated the next phase of assimilation: total silencing. It is the silence of system collapse, a world becoming deaf, blind, and numb in preparation for harvest. Every major city on Katara 6 relied on interconnected energy grids, civilian and military both. The Borg exploited these networks instantly, not by destroying them, but by overriding them. Power stations flickered. Backup generators engaged for seconds, then failed. Traffic systems collapsed. Hospitals went dark mid-surgery. Air control beacons vanished. The effect was not explosive. It was suffocating. One continent after another slipped into blackout. Not because the Borg were attacking, but because the planet itself was being reformatted.
Blackouts aren't darkness, they are absence. The collective does not see dark or light, only systems online or offline.
To prevent escape and ensure orderly assimilation, the Borg began to lock the atmosphere. Transport corridors, created earlier as ionized channels, were now amplified and stabilized. This allowed drones to beam down anywhere instantly, repeatedly, in perfect synchronization. It also ensured no aircraft could fly, no spaceport could launch, no shuttle could escape the planet. The sky itself became a containment field. Next, the Borg crushed the planet's leadership structures. Government halls lost power. Emergency command bunkers lost access to internal networks. Military headquarters found their encryptions compromised, then erased. High-ranking officials attempted to coordinate, only to find that all long-range communication, civilian, military, encrypted, secure, was transmitting in a looped pattern of static and silence. The planet's leaders were still alive. They were simply irrelevant.
I can sense their confusion. The collective calculates it, predicts how long before panic becomes paralysis, before paralysis becomes submission.
Without power, without communication, without leadership, society fractured. Civilian networks flooded with contradictory rumors. It's a meteor impact, a solar flare, a hostile power. It's sabotage. Something is in orbit, some kind of structure. Security forces mobilized, but without coordination, their responses were chaotic and localized. Police encountered crowds. Crowds encountered military blockades. Military units encountered nothing, because their orders never arrived. The Borg rely on chaos, not because they need it, but because it makes assimilation more efficient. While the planet fell into disarray, the Borg established their first footholds. They didn't target military bases or defensive stations. They targeted hospitals. Medical centers are densely populated, full of weakened individuals, equipped with equipment the Borg can repurpose, and psychologically sensitive locations that spread fear when compromised. Drones beamed into emergency rooms, surgical wards, maternity units. Nurses vanished into the green shimmer of transport beams. Doctors trying to stabilize patients suddenly found themselves facing silent, expressionless drones. Assimilation began here because it's where resistance is weakest, and where panic spreads the fastest.
They begin where defenses are lowest, where fear spreads the deepest, where the most biological material can be processed quickly.
Before full-scale assimilation begins, the Borg impose a moment of quiet. A brief, unnatural pause where the drones stop advancing just long enough for the planet to recognize the shape of its doom. Cities in darkness, skies shimmering with ionized corridors, power grids dying in sequence, hospitals silenced, emergency networks overridden. Every Kataran who looked upward saw the same thing. 3 perfect cubes, motionless, indifferent, patient. The Borg do not rush. The collective consumes worlds at the pace that yields the highest efficiency. And Katara 6 was ready. Silenced, blinded, disorganized, terrified. The world had reached the point the collective calls optimal acquisition state. Only then, only when panic had peaked and structure had collapsed, did the Borg issue their final directive. Deploy drones, begin surface assimilation. And the planetary nightmare truly began. Only now, once the world had reached optimal acquisition state, did the collective initiate the most recognizable phase of assimilation: drone deployment. But even this does not unfold the way most imagine. There is no marching horde, no dramatic landing parties. The Borg don't invade, they insert. They occupy space, not in numbers, but in nodes. Thousands of tiny, simultaneous points of infection spreading across a planetary body. Each drone is a scalpel, precise, replaceable, expendable. And the first wave, invariably, targets the same locations: population-dense zones, medical facilities, transport hubs, energy nexuses, political centers, high-tech research sites. Because assimilation is not conquest, it's engineering. Workers froze mid-task, civilians screamed, security forces raised their weapons, and the Borg ignored them. Assimilation does not react, it simply proceeds. A single drone could walk through a crowd of hundreds, unarmed, unhurried, and still achieve its purpose. Because drones are not opponents, they are carriers.
Their vision is layered. Every life form is tagged, indexed, prioritized. Every movement mapped, every scream measured only in decibels, not meaning.
The first drones didn't kill, they didn't fight, they injected. Assimilation tubules entered skin, muscles, veins. Nanoprobes flooded into bloodstreams. Some victims collapsed instantly. Others staggered back, gasping, scratching at their injection sites, trembling as their nervous systems were rewritten. Within minutes, pupils dilated, muscles seized, speech dissolved into static-laced groans. Pain responses shut down, memories became fragmented data, individuality flickered like a dying light. And then, the transformation began.
They cry out. The collective notes duration of screams. Average resistance time, 47 seconds. Irrelevant, but recorded.
As drones spread, the Borg began assimilating infrastructure. Not building, systems. Power relays, hospitals, transit grids, waste processing plants, water filtration towers, communication arrays. In minutes, entire districts became extensions of the collective. Sterile lights flickered, polymer plating extruded from walls. Organic structures became metal. Green energy conduits pulsed across civilian architecture. A city was no longer a city. It was a manufacturing organ. The first assimilation hubs appeared. Conversion alcoves, maturation chambers, cortical reinforcement units, drone refit scaffolds, reclamation pits. Everything a species needed to stop being a species. Hospitals were the first to fall and the first to be remade. Doctors treating patients became patients themselves. Nurses administering aid were restrained and injected. Medical equipment was ripped open and repurposed into Borg surfaces. The early assumption among civilians was that the Borg were targeting the weak. But the reality was colder. Hospitals contained the highest density of accessible biological material. It was efficiency, nothing more.
So many lives, not as individuals, as resources, as raw matter of the collective's use.
Police and military units attempted resistance. Shots were fired. Some drones fell. The collective adapted. Within seconds, weapons frequencies were countered. Armor was recalibrated. Drone shields shifted. Nanoprobes evolved. Every time a Kataran weapon discharged, the Borg altered their defenses. Every drone that was destroyed was replaced by 3 new drones rising from maturation alcoves. Resistance wasn't futile because the Borg said so. Resistance was futile because the fight was irrelevant. As the first wave saturated the cities, the collective expanded outward. Transport hubs were overwritten. Spaceports became skeletal drone factories. Industrial districts became processing chambers. Government buildings became central nodes for assimilation command. The spread was fractal, multiplying in geometric patterns. Each new assimilation zone generating new drones, each new drone seeding a new zone. Within hours, Katara 6 was less a planet and more a growing circuit board, lit by the pulsing rhythm of Borg machinery. Somewhere in the chaos, among millions of terrified civilians, the truth finally crystallized. The Borg were not here to conquer them. They were here to use them. Their homes, their bodies, their history, their entire world. Everything was raw material. And this slow infection spreading through every city, every building, every living being, was only the beginning. The Katarans had thought the cubes hanging above their world were the invasion. They were wrong. The cubes were just the delivery system. The real invasion was happening one body at a time. By the time the Resistance collapsed, Katara 6 was no longer a functioning civilization. The Borg had dismantled its power, its communications, its leadership, and its defenses. But the planet itself remained. A sphere rich with biological matter, infrastructure, and raw material. And the collective does not waste material. Mass assimilation is not a battle. It's not even a conquest. It is a planetary conversion process. A systematic rewriting of an entire ecosystem into machinery. Once the collective confirmed resistance was crushed, they initiated full deployment. Tens of thousands of drones beamed into major population centers simultaneously. Then, tens of thousands more. Civilian pockets that had survived the early waves now found themselves surrounded on all sides. There was no escape, no safe direction, no chance to hide. Every drone advanced with the same calm, synchronized precision. No shouting, no hesitation, no fear, no emotion. Just function. Assimilate, repurpose, expand. Cities began to transform, not through destruction, but through integration. Organic architecture became Borg architecture. The process was horrifyingly fast. Streets plated with dark alloy, windows sealed over with polymer. Towers hollowed and filled with regeneration alcoves. Where once there had been skylines, there were now vertical assimilation stacks. Rising spires festooned with conduits and glowing green nodes. Katara 6 capital, once a symbol of unity and peace, became a drone manufacturing plant. Entire districts pulsed with energy as the Borg laid down miles of conduit, spreading out like veins through the planet's surface. Cities did not fall. They were repurposed. The Katarans who survived the early waves were not rescued. They were processed. Assimilation hubs spread outward through transit systems, forming a web of conversion centers. Victims were dragged or marched through a series of stations, each one stripping away another layer of who they were. Individuality, memory, emotion, choice. The horror was not in the pain. There wasn't much. The nanoprobes dampened it quickly. The horror was in the quiet. The moment a person stopped screaming, stopped moving, stopped fighting, the moment they simply stared ahead, blank and empty. That was when assimilation completed. A mind turned off, a drone turned on.
They are dying. They are changing, becoming nodes, becoming functions, becoming what we already are.
The Borg do not merely take people, they take environment. Forests stripped, oceans seeded with nanoprobe filtration, wildlife subdued and harvested for biomass. Atmosphere ionized to stabilize transport corridors. Magnetic fields tuned to reduce interference. They shape worlds into tools. Katara 6's clean air filled with microscopic machinery. Its rivers carried nanoprobes. Its forests became drone farms. Its oceans churned with energy siphons extracting geothermal power from the planet's crust. An entire biosphere became an organ, a functioning part of a greater machine. Once the major cities collapsed, the collective connected each assimilation zone into a planetary network. Drone production clusters, tactical command nodes, environmental control sectors, data storage cores, biomass reclamation pits, planetary shield generators. Each node pulsed in rhythmic synchrony, like a beating heart. Katara 6 became a living circuit board and a perfect lattice of biological and mechanical systems operating together. Lights once used for culture and celebration were now the glow of assimilation chambers. Energy once used for homes and industry now powered drone gestation racks. The planet was no longer dying, it was becoming. By the time the cubes shifted position to begin final cataloging, less than 1% of the Kataran population remained unassimilated. Most were cornered in shelters, caves, or abandoned farmlands. Some fought, some prayed, some simply waited. But in the collective, Kyle and Ariska witnessed none of this. To them, the world they once loved was already gone. Their memories of Katara 6's existed only as coordinates, population density, resource potential, structural integrity, assimilation progress. Their homeworld was no longer a place, it was a file. A set of values, series of networks, a completed project. Every assimilated world has the same fate. There is a moment, A final, tiny sliver of time where enough of the population is assimilated, enough infrastructure converted, enough systems rewritten that the planet ceases to be what it once was. Katara 6 reached that moment 19 hours after the cube arrived. A planet of art, culture, families, science, and hope became a planet of conduits, alcoves, drones, and machinery. And when the collective completed its final calculations, the truth was undeniable. From the moment Kyle and Ariska were assimilated at Wolf 359 to complete the assimilation of Katara 6, only 32 hours had passed. But to the Borg, this was not perfection. During the last stage of planetary conversion, the collective identified a delay, a 4-hour inefficiency in the southern assimilation lattice, caused by unexpected atmospheric resistance and redundant biological variability. The world had not fallen as quickly as projected. Katara 6 became more than a completed project. It became a lesson, a dataset, a correction, an opportunity to refine their algorithms. The collective updated its models, adjusted its protocols, improved its efficiency. Next time, they would be faster. An entire world erased in a day and a half, and still, the Borg considered it too slow. Not hatred, not conquest, just improvement. When the final Kataran drone stepped into its alcove, when the last living pockets fell quiet, when the final data packet completed its transfer to the collective, Katara 6 stopped being a world. It became a process. And then the Borg did something most species never imagine. They left. Not all at once, not dramatically, not with a declaration, just silently. The 3 cubes broke orbit in perfect formation, rising away from the world they had consumed. They did not look back. The Borg have no concept of nostalgia, no satisfaction, no curiosity about what remains. Only efficiency. A new directive had already been calculated, somewhere light years away, and the cubes were needed elsewhere. What they had built below no longer required them. The departure of the cubes did not bring relief. It brought something worse. Normalization. Assimilation hubs continued to pulse. Nanoprobe reservoirs continued to flow. Regeneration alcoves lit up in sequence. One after another after another. Drone gestation chambers produced new units. Not because Katarans were left to assimilate, but because the planet itself had been turned into a Borg production asset. Cities hummed with mechanical rhythm. Forests crackled with the faint static of environmental filters. The oceans churned with geothermal siphoning machinery, turning the seabed into a harvested grid. There were no voices, no language, no music, no culture. Only the sound of a planet breathing in mechanical pulses. Katara 6 did not go quiet. It went efficient. Across the surface, there were places the collective saw no value in converting. A family home buried under layers of plating. A schoolyard fused into the flooring of a drone depot. A temple half absorbed by alloy and conduits. A playground now overshadowed by a maturation chamber. These remnants were not honored. They were not preserved. They were simply not worth integrating. The Borg do not erase beauty. They simply ignore it. And ignoring a world culture is more devastating than burning it. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Everything that Katara 6 made was forwarded through subspace, into the growing matrix of the collective. The planet was a server, a pump, a factory, a memory core. Every hour refined its integration, every cycle perfected its efficiency. The Katarans had once looked to the stars, hoping to join the larger galaxy. Now they served it as machinery. No distress signal was ever sent, no ship ever reported the Kataran incursion at Wolf 359. The Federation never knew the planet existed. To the wider galaxy, Katara 6 did not fall. It simply failed to appear on any star chart. A world erased so completely that its absence was never noticed. This is the quietest horror of Borg assimilation. Most species that vanish leave no record, no warning, no cultural scar on civilizations around them. They simply stop being. Katara 6 didn't die, it was absorbed, and the collective moved on. In the vast quiet of the Delta Quadrant, Katara 6 no longer exists. Not in maps, not in memory, not in the minds of the drones that once called it home. It's a node, a resource, a solved equation. A place where the collective learned to be more efficient by observing the flaws in its own perfection. There is no monument to the Katarans, no archive of their art, no preserved memorial of their civilization. Only data. Data the Borg will use on worlds that still believe they have the luxury of time. For the Federation, for the Romulans, for the Klingons, for everyone who looks at Wolf 359 and thinks, we survived, therefore we can survive again, Katara 6 is the reminder that survival was not victory. It was anomaly. A rare deviation in the system, designed to consume everything. The Katarans did not die because they were weak. They died because they were noticed. And in the cold calculus of the collective, their only lasting contribution was the lesson they provided. A 4-hour inefficiency, a correction to be applied next time, a refinement to a machine that stretches across the galaxy. And somewhere, across a star system no Federation vessel has ever mapped, 3 cubes drift silently through the darkness, calculating, adapting, improving. Prepared for the next world that dares to advance too far, too fast, or too brightly. Katara 6 was not conquered, it was curated. And in the end, the greatest horror of assimilation is not what the Borg take, it's what they leave. A silence shaped like a civilization that once dreamed of the stars.